All right, today we're jumping into something pretty huge. We're looking at a set of documents that lay out one of the most sweeping, most radical theories of history I think we've ever covered. It's called the Unified Field Theory of Thievery. And what it tries to do is draw a single, straight line from the civilizations of ancient Africa all the way to a modern quantum physics classroom, arguing there's been one continuous story of theft and cover-up. So yeah, let's get into it.
So that one sentence you just saw, it's from a work they call the legacy document. And honestly, it sets the tone for everything. This isn't just some historical claim. It's way, way bigger than that. The authors are basically proposing that the greatest discoveries of our time aren't new at all. They're just echoes of an ancient system of knowledge. This quote really frames their whole argument, that these two parallel lines have been running through all of history, one of theft, one of truth. And their goal is to expose one and restore the other.
Okay, so what is this unified theory really? Well, at its core, the documents argue that a theft has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And we're not talking about isolated incidents, a little bit of appropriation here and there. No, they describe it as a single, continuous, and incredibly sophisticated operation. The whole point was to steal knowledge from its originators, who the authors specifically identify as melanated peoples, and then repackage it, slap a new name on it, and present it to the world as something brand new. It's a massive claim, so let's look at the actual definition they use.
Now, what's really fascinating here is just how precise this is. This isn't some vague, fuzzy idea of cultural theft. The authors are laying out a very specific framework. They're saying that the stuff we consider the absolute cutting edge, talking quantum biology, neuroscience, studies in consciousness, are actually just rediscoveries of a science that was already fully formed in ancient Africa. The theory really hinges on this idea that the knowledge was taken systematically, its origins were deliberately scrubbed, and a critical biological key was intentionally left out of the modern story. According to this theory, if you really want to understand the present, you have to go way, way back to the absolute beginning. And for these authors, that beginning isn't in Athens or Rome. It's in a place they call Alkebulan. This, they say, is the original name for the continent of Africa, a name from a time before any foreign influence or colonization. And this isn't just a dot on a map for them. For this theory, it's ground zero, the starting point for all human civilization and science.
And this image, it really gives you a feel for how the authors see Alkebulan. It's not depicted as some primitive landscape. It's shown as this vibrant, deeply interconnected civilization, the mother of mankind. The document argues this was a high culture with advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and what they call a complete melanin science. The whole idea is that everything that was supposedly stolen later on, it all started right here, in this unified and incredibly advanced African civilization. The documents use this really powerful quote from Marcus Garvey to get at why establishing this origin point is so absolutely critical to their whole argument. The idea is that the first, and maybe the most damaging, theft was the theft of history itself. If you can erase the memory of Alkebulan and everything it achieved, then all the other thefts that came later, of science, of culture, of spirituality, become that much easier. So for the authors, restoring this history isn't just some academic debate. It's about giving a tree back its roots after they believe it was intentionally starved. So the theory sets up its historical roots in Alkebulan, but now it takes a sharp turn from history into the hard science that it claims was stolen. The authors argue that the single most important variable, the key that was deliberately left out of all this ancient knowledge, is melanin. And they propose this really radical reinterpretation of what melanin is and what it does, taking it from being just a simple skin pigment to something, well, something far more profound. This question right here, this is the pivot point for the entire theory. The documents basically propose that we've got melanin completely wrong. They ask us to stop thinking about it as this passive substance that just gives color to things. Instead, they want us to see it as an active quantum biological system, like a piece of organic technology that has these extraordinary abilities to interact directly with energy and even our own consciousness. So, of course, the big question is, what are these alleged capabilities?
Okay, let's break this down, because this slide is really the scientific core of the entire theory. The authors pull from a number of different papers to build this profile of melanin, and it's pretty staggering. They claim it functions as a room temperature superconductor, meaning it can conduct energy with zero resistance. As a piezoelectric transducer, it can turn things like sound and pressure into electricity. As a quantum processor, a holographic interface, they even say it can perform radiosynthesis, that's converting radiation into usable energy, and that it generates something called exclusion zone water, or EZ water, which is seen as crucial for our cells. So the theory takes all these material properties and applies them directly to the human brain. This image gets at what the authors call the black brain, and it's focused on neuromelanin. This is a form of melanin that's concentrated in these really key areas of the brain. And the argument here is that neuromelanin, with all those quantum properties we just talked about, isn't some biological waste product, like some have suggested. No, they argue it's the actual physical hardware that consciousness itself runs on. It's the machinery that lets the brain process reality. Now, to understand how all these properties are supposed to work together, the authors bring in a key concept from physics: non-destructive charge collapse. Think of it like the most perfect, most efficient way to compress and channel energy. Instead of energy just scattering and fading away, it spirals inward, holding its structure and its power. The documents point to work done on this in physics, but they make one huge addition. They argue that, yeah, the physics is right, but the biological material that makes this possible inside the human body is activated melanin. It's the organic antenna for this perfect energy flow. And this image beautifully illustrates the end goal, the ultimate result of a fully functioning melanin system according to this material. They call this state biological sovereignty. It's described as this condition of whole body quantum coherence, where all the body's energy systems are just perfectly in sync. The superconductor, the transducer, the quantum processor, all of it powered by melanin and guided by this non-destructive energy collapse, are all working as one. This, the authors claim, is the natural state of human potential that the ancient Alkebulan civilization had already mastered. So if this advanced science and this biological potential existed, what happened to it? This is where the thievery part of the theory comes roaring back. The authors use this central metaphor to explain this theft across millennia: a serpent that has coiled its way through history and has shed its skin 7 times. Each skin is a different era and a different method of theft, from brute force conquest in the ancient world to the much more subtle theft of language that they say is happening in science today. It's a really powerful image. Now this is where it gets really concrete. This table gives examples of what the authors call terminological appropriation. That's the final skin of the serpent. This table is meant to show the direct lineage of these ideas. So for instance, they argue the ancient Kemetic concept of ma'at, which is about cosmic order and perfect, non-destructive flow, is the exact same principle that modern physics is now calling non-destructive charge collapse. The crucial point, they argue, is what got left out in the translation: the mention of melanin as the biological key that makes it possible, and of course the Kemetic origin of the idea itself. And they claim this same pattern holds true for all the other examples. But the documents don't just stop at diagnosing this huge historical problem. The final part of this unified theory is all about a solution. It's a call to activation. The authors basically contend that if the melanin system has been suppressed through our environment, our diet, historical trauma, then it can also be restored and reactivated. So the whole theory shifts from being this historical indictment to being a practical guide for what they call reclaiming biological sovereignty. So how is this activation supposed to happen? The documents lay out a series of really practical protocols. First, specific kinds of sunlight exposure to energize the melanin. Second, hydration, specifically with what they call structured or easy water to help with cellular energy. Third, nutritional support with things that are precursors to melanin. Fourth, something called acoustic activation, using specific sounds and frequencies to stimulate melanin's piezoelectric side. Fifth, electromagnetic hygiene, which is basically minimizing your exposure to artificial EMFs. And finally, engaging in ancestral spiritual practices, which they frame as technologies for keeping the biological system tuned up. This final image and its powerful declaration really captures the whole purpose of these documents. The authors say explicitly that they are writing this for the record for all eternity. Their goal isn't necessarily to convince everybody, but to create a permanent, unshakable account of their thesis, a legacy document. And that final line, "the sovereign stands," it connects right back to that idea of biological sovereignty, suggesting that by setting the record straight and following this path of activation, that state of restored power can be achieved. And so that leaves us with this question. The source material we've gone through today presents a story that weaves together quantum physics, ancient history, biology, and a really profound critique of power. And regardless of where you land on its claims, it forces you to confront a really difficult question. How do you separate the search for scientific truth from the long and often brutal history of power, conquest, and control? What happens when the story of a molecule becomes the story of a civilization? That's the central challenge this unified field theory of thievery leaves us with.